This conference will now be recorded.
So to the extent that we try to shave off a little bit of this excess, it wouldn't make a difference in that it would require then slightly larger debt service. So there's a bit of a trade-off there in terms of how we try to manage the cash flow for the water utility. So as you can see here, there's a significant increase in the first 3 years of the water utility of 15% per year, and then thereafter it levelizes to 5% per year. We realize that this is a bit higher than what you've traditionally approved, and we've tried to mitigate this by taking a look at the billings for your ratepayers on a holistic basis. So in other words, not just utility by utility, but also, but rather from all utility services, water, sewer, storm, and solid waste as a whole. And I'll have a slide that goes over what the anticipated impact is to your ratepayers. This is a slide showing what the impact is for only the water utility to your single-family residential customers. And what we see here is a graph that shows a couple of things. Number one is the shaded area shows the cumulative percentage or the number of bills as consumption increases. So for example, at let's say 1,000 cubic feet of water usage, that represents about 50% of your customers. So about 50% of your customers are below that point, and 50% are above. And then as usage increases, as you can see, we go up in terms of the percentage of bills. So the large families or those households that use quite a bit of water, at let's say 2,000 cubic feet or more, what we're about there is about 85%, or about the remaining 5% of your customer base. Mike, was there a question?
No, I think that was a sneeze.
Okay. All right. This green line here represents the change to the billing. And what we see here is as the bill goes up, there are several inflection points. And those inflection points represent the breaks in the tiers. So as you recall, I mentioned early on that we are recommending that we move away from a single tiered structure to a 4-tiered structure. And as you can see here, the 4-tiered structure has breakpoints at about 1,000 cubic feet, 1,400, about 2,300, and then everything above 2,300. And how we capture those breakpoints, how we set those is we take a look at the detailed customer statistics for your water customers. And based upon those statistics, we break it based upon everything at 1,000, for example. This would represent the what we call the winter average. So it represents your indoor usage. So the water that someone might use for doing dishes, flushing your toilets, taking baths, etc. And then the second tier here represents what we call your annual average. So if we take a look at annual water consumption, what is that annual average? And the annual average is about 1,400 cubic feet. So what that represents would be water that someone would use year-round with a little bit of outdoor usage for watering the garden, for example, washing cars, etc. And then the third break point is what we call the summer peak. So during the summer period, when people use water at its fairly high levels, for example, like during very dry years, this would represent water usage at a period where customers are trying to maintain their garden, they're trying to maintain their lawns. Perhaps if they have a swimming pool, they may be trying to maintain that. And then everything over and above that summer peak, we would call this the penalty area, where someone uses really a lot of water beyond that summer peak, and they're really placing a lot of demands upon your water utility in terms of being able to supply water to all customers within the city. So this 4-tiered structure is a common structure that we see in cities within Washington State. It's a structure where it's intended to send conservation signals to your rate base. So as people use more water, as you can see, their billing would increase. And as the billing increases, it sends a pricing signal to folks that they may want to consider revising or changing behavior and try to conserve water. Okay. There's a lot of things going on in this graph, but I want to go over that in detail and make sure can understand what's happening there. Any questions for me on this?
So
in the slideshow, I do have sample billings that I can show you for customers at different points along this graph. We actually worked with Shannon and Mary to derive several customer bills, and we actually show what those customer billings would actually look like under the proposed water rate structure here. So one of the things that we try to strive for here is really protecting the low water user. So this would be your typical families, a small family of 3, perhaps a retired couple of 2, or a single person household. For example, in my household, we have a family of 3, and our water usage probably averages right about 1,000 cubic feet every 2 months. So this graph here really doesn't surprise me in terms of how folks land in terms of the usage spectrum. So the water rates that we're recommending, as you can see here, our existing water rates, we have a fixed charge that's based upon meter size, and then it goes up by meter size. And then multifamily customers right now receive a billing that is based upon the 5/8 or the 3/4 inch meter, regardless of what size meter that may be serving their property. Outside customers have a 150% premium, and then you have a discount for qualifying individuals within your city. And right now, you do not have a discount on for your water utility, but you do have for your sewer utility. And what we're recommending here is that we establish a discount of 25% for qualifying customers. And this would apply across the board to both their fixed charges as well as their volume charges that I'll show you on the next slide. The other thing that you see here is a schedule of increases for your bi-monthly fixed charge by year going out through 2025. And one of the things that you notice is that the scaling for the increases here goes up faster than the scale that you have currently. And the reason why we have that is we're recommending that your utility, that your billing follow the American Water Works Association standards in terms of the ratios for the size of the meter. So in other words, what this represents is when we take a look at a meter size and we think about how much water can go through that meter, the American Water Works Association recommends that that ratio be proportionate. So in other words, the volume of water that can go through a 1.5 inch meter should be proportionate to the amount of water that can go through a 1 inch meter. So even though there's a 1/2 inch differential here, the actual amount of water that can flow through that meter is actually double. So what we're recommending here is that is that you follow the American Water Works Association scaling or the ratios for your meter sizes. And then for the multifamily customers, we're recommending that they move away from the billing where they're only based, that their charges is based upon the 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter, but their billing is actually based on whatever meter size applies to their property. Most residential customers, the majority of customers are land within this 5/8 and 3/4 inch meter. We don't see very many customers that have meter sizes larger than that. Where you might see that would be a property that might it's either a very large property or it's a property where the homeowner wants to really keep their garden green year round, and they have a demand then for a bit more water than the typical household. For your volume charges, as I mentioned early on, currently the city of Woodland charges a residential customer a fixed or what we call a single volumetric charge for all water usage. And what we're recommending is we move to a 4-tiered structure. And as you can see, the breakpoints hit along the spectrum of this green line here. So those same inflection points. And again, as someone uses more water, what happens is they get pushed into a higher and higher block. So the charge for water at, for example, block number 4 is more expensive than the previous 3. And the very first block, we try to make that as affordable as possible. So therefore, the volumetric difference or the rate difference between what we're charging now to what we're recommending, that differential is not as large as, for example, the differential between what we're charging now versus blocks 2, 3, and 4. We have a rate structure for outside customers at 150%, qualifying discount customers at 25% or a 25% discount of the proposed rates. And then if there are outside customers who are qualifying households, they would receive 150% of the discounted inside rates. We also have recommended rates for non-single family folks or customers. And what we have here is a recommendation to maintain their rate structure at again, what's called a uniform or single block structure. And this would apply to non-single family customers as well as commercial customers. And you can see what the recommended rates are there. The reason why there's a recommendation to maintain non-single family customers at a similar structure than what they have now versus the change for the single family customers is that when we take a look at non-single family customers and how they use water over the course of the 12 months of a year, what we see is that their water usage is actually fairly stable. So there's not a whole lot of change from one month to the next for non-single family customers as well as commercial customers. Another thing that you notice here is that for your non-single family folks, that their inside rate here, as well as the outside rate, remains the same over the 5-year window here, whereas your commercial customers increase. And the reason for that is that when we evaluated the cost to serve or the share of the equitable share of costs for your customer classes, what we saw was that the non-single family folks are paying more than their fair share presently. So by maintaining their rate structure over time, and the charges over time the same. What we're allowing this rate class to do is to grow into their cost of service. And by the time we hit the end of year 5, they'll be pretty close to cost of service. And then for single family and commercial customers, we're recommending that those two classes move into their phase into their cost of service over a 3-year period. And that's why what we see here is a ramp up in terms of their relative costs for volume charges, as well as for the fixed charges. I know that was a lot of numbers there. I covered quite a bit of information. Any questions for me at this point?
I have a question just real quick.
Yes.
Your audio on our end is kind of cutting in and out, so.
Oh, sorry.
Right. So for the charging system, billing system, what's the reasoning behind that again?
What's the reason for the tiered rates? Is that your question?
Yeah, the 4-tier. Just what's the purpose for that versus what we've got going on now?
Sure. So what we have now is a rate structure that does not have any incentives for conserving water. So in other words, someone using 2,300 cubic feet of water is billed the same in terms of the unit costs as someone using 1,000 cubic feet of water. Okay. So the recommendation here is to move them into a higher block. So as someone uses more water, their billing would increase. You know, in terms of a choice for the city, you know, for council, you certainly have a choice. You don't have to. Nothing that says you must implement cost of service rates. You know, certainly, you know, you could maintain your existing rate structure and continue billing your customers using a single block rate structure. And if the city, if you would like to do that, then I can certainly rebuild this table and show you what this rate would be. And basically, what it would show is it would be a 15% increase over this charge in 21, another 15% 22, another 15% 23, and then 5% per year thereafter.
Okay, and okay. Also, I'm a little slow, so kind of bear with me. Let's say that there wasn't a 4-tier billing system, right? Wouldn't people that use more water still get charged more than somebody who used less water?
That's right, they would. They would.
Okay. So the 4-tier system then is just to kind of, for lack of a better word, train people to be more conservative with their water.
That's correct. That's
okay.
Right.
Okay. And as far as the discount goes, what would somebody have to do to qualify for a discount?
There are 2 qualifying factors. One is whether the person is disabled or not. And then the second factor is whether or not they meet household income requirements. And I forget what the discount, what that provision is. I believe it is set at, it's a specific income level that household must demonstrate that they are not going over. Okay. And there's an annual application process where your qualifying residents would need to submit paperwork along with tax returns that would prove that their household is operating within or below those thresholds.
Okay, and it's considering that let's say we go with the 4-tier system, considering that's basically being used to get people to conserve. If people in the discounted section use just as much water as, like let's go with the 2,300, range, do they lose their discount, or do they get bumped into a higher bracket for payment, or how?
Yeah, no, they wouldn't lose their discount. They would get bumped into a higher bracket as shown here.
Okay.
So, for example, at tier 4, they would be billed about 4.5 cents per cubic feet of water. That's above 2,300 versus someone who's not on a discount. They're being billed at just over 6 cents per cubic feet.
Okay. Thank you.
In our experience, when we look at customers that are on a discounted program, very few actually use that much water. Most are small households. They may be a household that may have a disabled family member, but they're generally households that are quite frugal in terms of how they use water. The ones that might use more water but qualify for a discount, what we see are customers that, for example, have a home dialysis machine, and those machines use quite a bit of water, and for those customers, they tend to use a bit more water.
And what about, maybe I missed it under the commercial part, but what about businesses that are required to use water and it's not a lifestyle choice to use that much water? They have to for their work. Do they get a discount or reduced fee, or do they pay the same single family?
No. Yeah, the answer to that is no. They do not receive a discount. The pricing signal for those customers then, they and I do have a couple of sample bills that I can show you in the next few slides to show what would happen to a non-single family customer or a commercial customer under this billing structure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Great questions. Any other questions for me before I move on? One of the things that we always take a look at is the revenue mix, and will there be a change by moving to a different rate structure? The reason why we take a look at this is, by changing your rate structure, does it expose the utility to greater volatility? And how we take a look at this is we take a look at your revenues coming in system-wide, and under the current rate structure, it's split about 52% volumetric charges versus 48% fixed charges. So, for example, 40% of your revenues comes in via your fixed monthly charges, and then the balance comes in through your existing billings via the foreign block charges. By moving to a four-tiered structure and assuming that customers do not change their water consumption behavior, what we see is a movement towards greater revenues coming in from your variable charges to about a 60-40 split. While we're moving towards a greater mix of revenues coming from your variable charges, this split actually doesn't concern us. We generally try to target a revenue mix that's no more than, for example, about 65-35 or 70-30. Once we start moving into that range, then we start becoming a little bit concerned that the revenue for the utility may be a bit more exposed. And the reason why we're concerned about this is when your customers use more water, they get pushed up into a higher block. And naturally, when that happens to a household, they may change water consumption and then begin to conserve water, and then actually drive down revenues for your water utility. So that's something that we try to watch for, and that would be something that we would recommend that Mary and Shannon watch for is if you do implement a 4-tiered structure, is in the first year or two is to monitor how much revenue comes in within each of your 4 blocks, and is that changing? I mentioned that I had a few sample billings for you, and I want to show these to you. The first one is for a single-family residential bill. These are the same hypothetical customer illustrated in the sewer utility. So for a low water user, again, a 2 or 3 person household, a typical user, which would be more along the lines of a 4-person household, and then a large water user would be more along the lines of a large family, perhaps 5 or 6 people in that household. So what we see here is a billing differential. Again, this takes into account the change in the utility tax. So for the low water user, their billing would increase, as you can see here, by a little bit less than $20 every 2 months. These are bi-monthly charges. For a typical water user, their billing would increase by about, as you can see here, by about $24 every 2 months. So about $12 a month. And then for the large water user, what we see here is that their billing would increase by just under, that's about almost $60. So about $3 each month. And again, this reflects the water usage and water usage falling into those higher blocks, and therefore resulting in a larger bill. We also took a look at what would happen on a combined basis. So this would be for the water bill for water, sewer, stormwater, assuming the baseline rate recommendations that we presented back in mid-June, and then solid waste. And what we have here is we show you the numbers for a low water user customer. Their current bill is about $284 every 2 months. And then by the year 2022, their billing would increase to about $323 every 2 months. And this increase here is about a 14% increase. And again, that's over a 2-year period. For a typical water user, their billing would also increase by about 14%. And then for a large water user, their billing would increase by about 19%. Now, part of this is being masked by the introduction of a new charge for your stormwater program. So to really have a apples-to-apples comparison, if we were to exclude the stormwater billing from the charges, what we see here is this would represent about a 10% increase bi-monthly, again, 11% in this case, and then about 17% in this case. So we want to try to illustrate that for you and give you a sense as to what would happen in terms of the totality of a customer's bill. Any questions for me here?
Not yet, sir.
All right. Here's a multifamily residential customer as well as a commercial customer. And what we see here is for a commercial customer, their billing would increase by quite a bit, a little bit over double. And this reflects for this customer who has a 2-inch meter, it reflects the higher or the larger fixed charge, again, following the American Water Works Association ratios. And then for a multifamily building that may have, for example, 2 units with a 1-inch meter, their billing would, as you can see here, only increase only slightly. Again, part of this reflects the when we take a look at the billing for that multifamily customer, for example, under a 1-inch meter, they're going from a $49 charge to about a $125 charge. Again, this is over 2 months, but then their volumetric charge here for the non-single family customer, their billing here would, if I'm looking at this, yes, their billing here would increase as well. So what we're showing here is for this customer, excuse me, one more slide. Their billing here would reflect for this hypothetical customer whatever water usage we use to calculate their billing. We also took a look at your water assessment charge, similar to the sewer utility. This is your assessment charge that is assessed on new connections to your utility system. So the same RCW applies to the water utility as it does to the sewer utility. And what we're trying to do is capture their equitable share of connecting to your water system and their fair share of what it costs to deliver water to that new connection. And for this charge, what we see here is you have an existing charge of $3,200 for every new connection. And what we're recommending is that this charge increase to by about $1,000 to about $4,200. The choice for the city is you can certainly maintain the charge at what it is now, or you can increase it, but you shouldn't increase it beyond the calculated revised charge here, because that represents the maximum fair share of costs for a new connection. And if you were to charge more than $4,200, for example, for a new connection, you may expose the city to challenges where someone might argue, gosh, I'm paying more than my fair share of connecting to the city's utility system. Why is that? For your water assessment charge, we recommend that your charge also follow the American Water Works meter capacity ratio, as I mentioned earlier, or as I described earlier. And as you can see, the scaling for this charge would increase by the size of the meter at a much faster rate now. One of the things that we see here is generally you have very few connections at these very large meter sizes. We generally see these in very large industrial buildings. And this is how it would compare to other municipalities in the area. And as soon as I finish here, I'm gonna go grab my charger because my computer says I'm running low on battery here. But as you can see here at the proposed charge, you're right under Richfield and above Kelso. The city of Camas is clearly an outlier at $7,300. So in terms of a wrap up, what we're recommending is a set of water rates that would fully fund your water needs. It would maintain financial sustainability for your water utility, as well as achieve customer class cost equity. As with the sewer utility, we would recommend that we update this rate study once every 3 to 5 years to just ensure that everyone's paying their fair share, or as things change within the city. And we would also recommend that if you do institute changes to your billing structure, is to allow sufficient time for Shannon and her group to reprogram the city's utility billing software. So that concludes my presentation. As I mentioned, I have a couple of sample billings here. This is for an actual low use water customer. And what we see here is their total billing here for this customer increases by about $40 every 2 months. And we can see where the changes are in terms of water, sewer, storm, and solid waste charges between 2020 and 2021. And this is just a graphical representation of that customer. And as you can see, for this customer, they use a fairly low amount of water and it's pretty steady over the course of the 12 months. Here's a more typical water customer that may have a little bit of outdoor usage. And you can see how their billing would increase. And then for a, I thought I had a larger, then here's a high use customer. As you can see, this customer really peaks during the summer. They use quite a bit of outdoor water. Presumably to kind of maintain their lawn and their garden. And you can see under the revised structure, their billing would increase by quite a bit, by about almost $800 over the course of a year. So I'm going to pause here for a second. I want to see if you have any questions, and if I may, I'm going to run and grab my charger as well.
Okay, I'll start the conversation here.
Okay, great. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, discussion on what was just presented. Mr. Fredericks.
Well, it's, from what I've seen, it looks like council has been under charging for our capital improvement needs, even after we've made attempts to try to right-size that. When I first joined council in 2008, I think the first night I was there, maybe it was the second meeting, I think Ms. said, I asked, hey, what happens if we don't pass this increase? And she said, well, it'll be bankrupt in 6 months. So I think we've come a long way with that. And I certainly don't like to pass increases, but it has to be recognized that the ratepayers of the enterprise have to keep that going. A few questions that I have and a couple of comments. Are we allowed to put a sand and use that for our garden?
I think we're in the city, we used to.
Don't you have to get a permit? Or do we have to know about it?
Who says?
You don't think so? You think that
I think
they're just allowed?
Okay.
What, do you know if it's in the commercial zone as well, or only at residential?
Sure. Okay.
Well, I think about, I'm sorry, jump in real quick. I think about the letterbox and the water that they're putting out on the lawn. Would they be able to, I guess that would be a good question. Are they able to put in a sand well instead of putting $40,000 into a larger or a separate meter to prove that it's just irrigation?
I don't think they would be able to. That would be a non-exempt use of groundwater, requiring water requirements.
Okay.
So my guess is they couldn't do an exempt well and pump it on.
Okay.
I thought it was only residential.
But residential could.
Gardening.
Okay.
I guess I'm also a little concerned, and certainly my comments are not directed to Mr. Cha. I'm not going to shoot the messenger here. But when I look at a typical user like myself and my family, when I add in the stormwater, when I add in the sewer, and when I add in the water increases, in the next 5 years, my bill will be north of almost $600. And so I guess I'm a little concerned when I go back to slide 3, and many families or many folks have asked me during this time, can you at least set us up with monthly billing to help me be able to budget? A lot of people, I understand, like for myself, I estimate what that's going to be and I put it in, and I recognize that I've got to cut the bill in half. Unfortunately, a lot of people budget based on monthly. They don't base on every other month. And then when it comes due, it's a shocker, especially when we're increasing significantly to pay for the capital improvements that are required in the to run the actual utility. So I am very interested in having a further discussion about monthly billing. I think it's something that we should look at. And that is the one component that I would say that I disagree with. And I do recognize that there are going to be some additional costs associated with that. I'm also concerned with the increase to some of the large users that we may have. I'm concerned. I would just like to have an understanding of existing commercial users and what their bill would look like today, 2022, 23, 24, and 25. I would just like to know that information. I think that would be helpful. And then I think that this study should be included in every budget meeting going forward as a document that includes the water and sewer plan. And that should be part of our budget, driving that discussion when we do budgeting every year. Many times I see that we do these studies and they get shelved and we collect dust. They sit on a shelf somewhere and they collect dust. And then we put in the budget, whatever, but there's nothing there telling the story about why we're having to make the policy decision that we're making. So, and then American Water Works Group, who is this group and who are they made up of, Mr. Cha?
Sure. So they're it's called the American Water Works Association. So it's a professional association that that serves water interests throughout the country. They're kind of really seen as a recognized leader in the area. They have recommended best practices for managing water utilities. They actually write a manual on how to set rates for water utilities. And that manual is actually followed by many rate consultants, including our firm. So I really think of them as very much like the, for governmental operations, very similar to, like, for example, the GFOA, or the Governmental Finance Officers Association, where the GFOA prescribes or issues of pronouncements about best practices, ways to maintain or manage your city finances, etc. So,
Okay.
so to that, or the AICPA, for example, and other organizations similar to that.
Mr. Cha, do you have anything that ties in the finding from the sewer, that ties in, and I recognize that the council has not taken action on a policy decision as it relates to stormwater, but if we were to enact all of the recommendations that you're suggesting, what my total bill would look like, assuming we also know what our total garbage increases are going to be by year, what the total bill is going to look like going forward. Is there something that ties it all together in?
Right. I don't have it for you year by year, Councilman. I just have this slide that shows what it is just for a snapshot of 1 year.
Okay.
Certainly prepare that and show what it would look like as it scales out over the next 5 years.
Okay.
And if you like that, I can easily prepare that.
He's doing math, just a
Doing
moment.
math, I'm sorry. Yeah, it just looks like, it looks like just earlier that, again, I'm very concerned with the high increases on the front end here. And granted, I understand why. But again, with having bi-monthly billing, you're looking at $600 bills in 2024.
Mrs. Rip.
So one of the options that we talked about during this process was that we were checking with our utility software company. And they do have an option, kind of like the PUD does, where they spread it out over 12 months and then every month where they true it up. And so we were looking into that more. That's the good news. The bad news is they don't have that feature used by any of their customers with their incumbents right now.
Mhm.
So we would, if we chose to do that, we would be one of the first customers.
And being a pilot never really works real well. I found that out in the end,
That is an option.
because I don't want to be the one that fixes the issues or concerns from that. I don't know. I would like to see us look at monthly billing. I think that would help people budget better. But these are we're looking at a 50% increase between now and 2024 just on the water portion. Not including sewer, not including stormwater, which frees up more money for our street fund. So I don't know.
Mr. Cha, you had spoken about the utility tax reduction down to 10 point something. What
Yes,
does that keep our current collection or our current revenue collection neutral right there? Is that why you took it down to 10?
that's correct. That's correct, Mayor.
Okay. So
So
with, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead and finish your thought, Mayor.
With the addition of the stormwater, you took that into account that there would be utility tax on that as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
At 12.5%.
Okay. Mrs. Rip, the other, I want to call them utilities. When we talk about phones and everything else, are we collecting utility tax off those as well? 6%. And that's
next.
okay. So that's just, we're just there. That doesn't affect any of this. Okay. Okay. So unless it's, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chuck.
Yep, you're welcome.
So what are the next steps exactly? And what is council going to do next?
So, well, what's questions or more comments for, or questions for Mr. Chuck?
Wondering how this rate compares to other surrounding areas.
You had a graph on there.
He's got a slide in your packet there.
Yeah, well, on the high end, just beneath Richfield.
Can you, Mr. Chuck, can you go to the comparison slide, please, of the other entities?
That's just the water assessment charge. That's not,
Sure.
that's a time charge.
So what I have is just a comparison of just the water assessment charge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What
So I think that was in the last presentation.
this was in a similar chart like this was also in the sewer presentation. What I don't have, but I can create it for you, would be, for example, what a typical bill would be in Woodland, what it is now versus 2021, and how that compares to these same jurisdictions at that same usage level.
Okay. Would that be helpful for council? Not that, I mean, yeah, if you could prepare that, please.
Yep,
Just
no problem.
water portion.
No, for a total bill, correct?
That will be yes, we can calculate for the total bill. And yes, for water, sewer, storm, if they have a stormwater utility, for example, and then a solid waste.
Okay.
Mr. Chaw, can you do me a favor and add on the bottom of that what the expense would be in future years, assuming the council passed the rate increases each year? So what would be my total cost in 2022, 23, 24, 25?
Yes. Yeah. And I yes, sir, I do have that. I have that written down as one of my follow-up items.
Would that include the utility tax as well for each one of those jurisdictions?
Yes, we want to make sure that it's an apples to apples comparison. So whatever their prevailing water utility tax rate is, we would capture that. So, you know, we just to prepare you for that, I'm kind of fully expecting that there's going to be a wide range of utility tax rates that will be embedded in that billing, but that billing or that utility tax should be included in order to really see what the total out-of-pocket impact is to your ratepayers.
Any other questions?
I don't really have a question, just a quick comment. Again, this has nothing to do with Mr. Chaw, but I have a little bit of a concern with using water rates or any other kind of rates in order to punish people into changing their behavior. It's not the role of government to play social engineers and use our utilities in order to try to train somebody into using less water. If we needed to raise the rates in order to cover projects or anything else that we had going on, I'd be happy to take part in that discussion, but using something simply to change people's behavior, I've got a real issue with. That's it.
Well, government has been social engineering for years. The liquor tax is a prime example. We want people to drink less, so we have the highest liquor tax in the nation. We want people to smoke less cigarettes. We have the highest cigarette tax in the nation. We want people to drive less. So we've given tax incentives for people to buy electric cars that'll go 200 miles and then stop working. I mean, so we were social engineering. We've been social engineering almost everything. So I get what you're saying, but it's
Just because we have been doing it, I mean, that goes back to the thing, you know, why do we do it this way? That's the way it's always been done. It doesn't mean it's the right way. You know, it doesn't mean that that's our role as representatives of the city.
So then help me understand with your argument. Are you then suggesting that you are not for a tiered, that everyone should pay based upon just usage and no one's going to get a tiered rate? Because
I don't think that somebody already being punished for using more water by getting a higher water.
and social engineering, right back into the point is we had our budget meeting this evening and we are down 199,800 cubic feet. Did I say that? In the last year, in water and sewer. What is that telling me? So it seems, so the social engineering, it seems to be working. People are using less, but they're paying, unfortunately, they're paying more because it costs us to run the program. It costs us to run the enterprise. So water consumption is down nearly 200,000 cubic feet year over year, 646,000. What is, okay, I'm sorry. The first billing of the year down 200,000 cubic feet. The second billing down 646,000. And the third billing down 2.9 million cubic feet.
So were those reductions due to programs that we put into place in order to intentionally punish them to change their behavior, or because they were like, okay, this is my water bill, I don't like, you know, paying that, so I'm going to use less water? A choice that they're making on their own.
Well, I know that goes, that's what I guess I'm trying to, are you advocating for not a tiered?
I'm not a fan of the 4-tier system. No,
You just pay for what you use.
exactly.
And no averaging. I watched a whole webinar thing on why averaging saves staff time and money. But I have a dead yard in the summer and my bill is high, and then my bill is higher in, or like the same in the winter. I have a dead yard. I shouldn't have, I'm not watering it, obviously. I mean, the one summer I did, my bill was like $600 and I was like, it can die. So it's been dead every summer since. But people expect that what they use is what they're being charged for, not it's what we think. Because I remember doing this online, asking everybody, hey, how much is your water sewer garbage bill? And there was like 4 of us with the identical same amount in 4 different parts of town. So how do 4 people with totally different lifestyles have the exact same bill? Because of averaging. So me, I would rather pay for what I'm using and not what somebody thinks I used a year ago or 12 years ago or wherever the average came from. Does that make sense? Like, just like when you buy gas, once you're empty, you go refill because you're paying for what you use, not what you think somebody might be using. I guess gas is a good example, but I think you guys get it.
Martin, did this take into account averaging or no?
In terms of setting the breakpoints, Mayor, yes, it did. So we took a look at how all of your single-family residential customers use water, and then on average, how that class uses water over the course of 12 months. And that's how we set those breakpoints for the 4 tiers.
How would the how would the numbers look if we were to remove averaging out of that? Would it go up? Would those increases go up, go down?
Is that a choice that we as government make, or is it a choice that the folks in the community, what if I want my bill averaged? I mean, I don't know how it is today. And I guess my overall concern from this is I believe Mr. Cha will let us do anything that we want. And then he'll put it all in the hopper and then out will come a number. But I think it would be important to come up with that decision. I thought we did this already. But give some direction on how we want, because regardless if we don't want tiered rates and we want to just do what folks use, then that's going to be information that he's going to have to determine, okay, if you do that, here's what your numbers are going to be. And then from there, we have a choice to make. I would think. I don't know the next steps if the council doesn't necessarily agree on the final product. What does that look like?
Well, if you do a vote, it's not quite funny.
Well, it would, but I think the idea is to have that information ahead of time, so we have maybe an option to look at. But in order for that to happen, the council needs to give direction to staff, who in turn can give direction to Mr. Cha's group. I don't get the name, so they can provide us with the information that we're looking for in order to make an informed decision. And so that's all I'm saying, because this doesn't go away after tonight, and we're still going to have to deal with either doing it, and there may be other choices that I'm not aware of. So I guess at the end of the day, I think it would be important for staff to know, and I know we just got this tonight, but at some point some direction, because this is going to be a policy decision that's going to have to be made in conjunction with stormwater, which we haven't finished talking about yet, and the sewer component. So I don't know how to tie all that in together. So what does staff need?
How about we ask the question that you just threw out there? Mr. Cha, what are the next steps after this?
The next steps are a couple of things. Number one is, do you want to change your water rate structure at all? The one option for the council and for the city would be, do you want to just maintain the existing rate structure? So that would be the first line to cross. Then the second line across would be, okay, so how much do we adjust rates by for 2021, knowing the type of expenses that we have to cover, and is that acceptable? And if that rate change is not acceptable, for example, then the options then for the city would be to go back, take a look at these, for example, I'll pick on the water utility, pick the water utility expenses, including the capital expenses, and ask, are there, must these projects be done in 2021? Can we delay those? We did ask that question during the study. We talked to Tracy quite a bit about that, and our understanding is that those projects that are identified are critical to the water utility. There were some projects that Tracy had identified early on, but those were already moved out in consideration of the type of fiscal impact it may have to the utility. So I feel like we've already scrubbed that with Tracy, but certainly, if council has questions on that, I'll be happy to work with Tracy and Pete and revisit that question and come back and support a discussion before the city council.
And I echo that with Martin. That's something that we discussed for well over a month on trying to jockey and negotiate on the list of, because I was doing the same thing. I've had more time to digest, obviously, because I was having some of the same questions, and these rates seem high. What can we do to get them down? Mr. Boyce got involved. Like, what do we need to do? And then having this discussion with Tracy of delaying projects, getting projects off the table, and just kind of reallocating throughout the years to drive that down and try to come up with a game plan. So we can go through that exercise again with council if you'd like, and discuss it. But we have talked about it at length already and made those adjustments.
So I'll just let, I am completely supportive of what has been provided here. The only thing that I'm not supportive of is the bi-monthly billing. I think that needs to go to monthly. But that's where I stand on it, so we can move the ball forward. But I've had an opportunity to take a long look at this.
And Councilman, if I may, I could just speak briefly about the movement to monthly billing. I forget the exact numbers, but what I recall was that by moving to bi-monthly billing, the additional expenses equated to roughly a percentage point for the water utility. And then there was also an impact to the sewer utility as well. So, for the sewer utility's share of utility billing expenses for water utility, and then I would expect there would be a slight impact to the storm utility as well, to pick up their relative fair share of the additional expenses. And we worked with Mary in identifying what those additional expenses would be, and those included the additional meter reading costs. So you have a contract with a private firm to read your meters, and that's done bi-monthly now. So that would increase or double, right, to 12 times a year. You also have mailing and processing expenses. That's also contracted out, and that would increase. And then there's an expectation that that there may be additional administrative expenses in Mary's and Shannon's group, and that may require either extra help or additional portions of staff, whether part-time, to help out with that workload.
Just question: are there any options for farming out all of the billing, which would include customer service billing all being done somewhere else? Are there companies that do that, or are they typically housed within the municipalities?
That's a really good question. Most municipalities that we work with, they have that as in-house function. I've seen very few examples of that function being outsourced. if it is outsourced, it's primarily the billing and the mailing function, where a third party would, the data from the city would get sent to the mailing house, and then they would do the actual printing and the mailing of the bills.
When you put together the information that shows comparisons, will you also just put on whether or not the municipality provides a monthly bill or bi-monthly bill?
Yes, I will do that. That's a very good question.
Someone on council that wants it, and if that's the case, then I'm okay with not doing it.
Right. I'll go one step further, and I'll also have our staff research and see if that function, that utility billing function, is done in-house or outsourced. Just one last thing I just wanted to share with you, regardless of whichever path the city council decides to take, whether you maintain the existing billing structure or you move to something new, whether you maintain a bi-monthly structure or you move to a monthly structure. We recently completed a study for the city of Ferndale, worked very closely with Yuri Barnett, the city manager there, and his group. And one of the things that we found very useful for them was we produced this for them, which was a newsletter. And the purpose for this was they found in Ferndale that they had a need for finding a way to communicate to their ratepayers what the utility expenses paid for. The way we set this up is here's what your utility buys. This is how much we're managing. This is how large your utility system is and what it takes to manage it. Gave some overall statistics about each of their different utility systems. And then we had a short series of Q&A questions. Why, in this case, this newsletter was produced early on at the outset of our study. So one of the questions that they wanted to make sure that their citizens understood was, why is the study being conducted in the first place? Are my bills going to increase? And then what's the city doing to ensure that rates remain affordable? And then how are the monies being used? And one of the things that they had asked for, as well as you, of course, is how do our utility bills compare to neighboring jurisdictions? So anyway, I just throw this out for food for thought. This might be something that your city may want to consider having for your ratepayers as well.
Yes. I think one of the challenges that we, at least that I've seen, is that we do a rate increase and the folks just see the increase, but they don't understand the why behind it. And I don't think we do a very good job of explaining the why. We're the one, this is representative democracy. This is how it works. We get to study it and then we make the decision. But I think that the thing that we miss is at least sending out the information to explain why it is we're taking the action that we're doing. And I think if you do that, I think it sets up the average user or citizen in this case with, okay, this is why they're making the decision. It isn't they're increasing my rates by X%. It's this is why they're doing that. I think that is absolutely something that is a value add that should be looked at. And if this group can help us with that, that's something that I would love to see. Because when you talk 15% rate increases for 3 years in a row, just on the water portion, you better have a story behind why.
Especially the rates they're paying right now.
So Martin, overall, when we talk about, and you might not have that number handy, overall, the increase in the bill, do you have a percentage of that? Because we've got different components that are coming in here, with one being higher, one being lower, with water being higher, sewer being lower. Do you have an average overall of what the increase would be? Just
Right.
I know we're talking about
The
15%
average-
in perspective.
The average is about, for the low water user, is about 10%. For the typical water user, it's about 10% as well. And this excludes stormwater. So if we include stormwater, 14%, and about 19%. So I think if you thought of it in round numbers, between 15 to 20% is what I would suggest.
In year one. That would be year one.
That's right.
Okay.
Year two, again, 20%?
In year two, that would be about,
Well, because the stormwater was added in year one, right? So year two, it wouldn't be.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So in year two, it will be a little bit less because stormwater becomes a part of the base. But I would expect that the percentage change would be in the low double digits, about 10 or 11%.
Okay. In year two, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
And once I put together the statistics for you, I'll definitely show you what that looks like.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or questions for Mr. Shaw? We were talking about next steps. It sounds like I was writing down the questions as you were, or the items as you were with talking about rate structure. How much do we adjust the rates? We talked about the projects. Billing, sounds like we need some information coming back. And then who else is outsourcing? Is that possible? And maybe just communicating to the community what is necessary for what we've got on the horizon for projects and why this is being discussed. Okay. Are we missing anything else, Mr. Shaw?
No, Mayor, I think those are the big things. On the screen here, I was taking notes as everyone was talking. These were the things that I had to do, at least for myself. And I'll try to get these done within the next week and send information back to you. But possibly revisiting the monthly billing question, what the impact is to large customers, commercial as well as single family customers, how a typical billing would change for each year over the next 5 years, how we compare to other jurisdictions, and whether or not you're interested in pursuing developing some type of communication to the community.
Okay, Mrs. Holland.
Okay, so refresh my memory. Every year we raise the utility tax 6% for the fire department, correct?
Not every year, but we did a couple years ago or last year.
So if we annex, if the fire department is annexed, what would happen with that 6%? And would that already be being collected in? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know you're tracking.
Okay.
We tried to review the revenue neutral, so we left the public utility tax in place. And really, it's necessary to keep general fund running. It would stay in the general fund for services out there. If we reduced it with a large amount of property tax going on, it will be problematic. We looked at different scenarios where we dropped the public utility tax and didn't drop the property tax quite as much. The council decided to go with all of the property tax. But if we reduce the public utility tax, we're going to have to find expenditures to reduce also.
Did you catch that, Martin?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, I just realized Mr. Boyce was muted. No, it's fine. We were discussing the utility tax and potentially lowering it further and what we're currently using it for, because we're looking at fire annexation for a vote. So Currently, right now, we take a lot of that money and give it to the fire department. So we were just having that discussion.
Okay.
Everyone looks super excited. I know you can't see them all, Martin, but they're super excited.
Very much. So.
And I think they're dazed a little bit here,
Yeah.
so they're processing. Anything else?
Exciting stuff, Mr. Cha.
So it sounds like we may need to have you back one more time.
Sure, no problem.
And maybe for another workshop, and hopefully at that time council will and maybe can we get those, do we get the presentation before the meeting? Okay, so make sure that that's getting out to everybody so they have time to digest it and then be prepared for the conversation for the next workshop.
Absolutely.
Ferndale also.
Oh, and if you could send over a copy of that newsletter for Ferndale, just so they can have that to look over as well.
Sure, I will send it right after this meeting.
Oh, perfect, thank you. We'll get that out to you. So is there anything else council needs on this, or just digesting?
I'm a process person, so I'm trying to understand what are the next steps and how does the stormwater play into that, and when are we going to have a meeting that council has basically a workshop with direction that is provided and then a final product back to council for a policy decision.
So we wanted to make sure you saw the entirety of.
Stand by, Martin.
Sure.
So, oh, here we go. You have to mute now. So we wanted to make sure council could see the entire impact to the ratepayer. And now we've got all that information in. There's some additional information you want to see, so we need to have a workshop on that. We'll have to have an individual discussion about the stormwater to give it a yay or nay or a modified version of it. And I think once we have consensus in a workshop, we can move towards the overall vote. I've seen some jurisdictions have, a public hearing, especially when you see impacts as great as this. You could advertise a public hearing, get input, and then make your final decision once you have that. It's kind of hard in this environment. We're trying to put off, these presentations, hoping we could have Mr. Cha here in person. And it would be nice to be able to, have a room full of people, citizens, and discuss this. We can still try to do that, as best we can. Yeah, the next steps right now are provide you all the information you need to make an intelligent policy decision. And we'll have to make some key decision points on stormwater, rate structure for water. I haven't heard much different on the sewer portion of it. And I don't know if council wants to have a discussion on capital projects, especially with water, because they're all front loaded. Well, not all front loaded, but there are a number of large projects on the front end of the timeline. So I see those as the different decision points. And once we work those out in workshops, then we could have a public hearing, hear from the citizens as far as what they think and how they feel about it, and then go to a city council vote.
On the large projects, is it, are we able to get a, hey, here's the current status, here's why we need to do it and when we need to do it by, and here's what will happen if you don't do it, or put it off for the future? Because it sounds like Ms. Coleman is saying it needs to be done yesterday.
Yeah, for instance, our water reservoir is one of the big money items at the front of this. As you've been reported to, there's been a leak that we're having trouble fixing. So it's very difficult to move that back in the timeline. And there are other reasons for other projects when they have to happen. So we have our capital water plan that, we can present to the public and council. But Ms. Coleman would have to provide some explanation about why these projects need to happen when they happen. We can have her take care of that.
And there was also discussion about bonding as well, too, because we won't have all the money. Correct?
Right.
And that was taken into account with your presentation as well, Mr. Cha. I believe that was one of the
Right.
portions.
So if we don't bond for some of these capital projects and just try to finance it on a cash basis, that means the rates would go up a whole lot higher to cover that. And I believe we saw some examples of what that would mean, and it just isn't doable that way. We do need to incur the debt.
Yes.
Sunshine.
Okay, anything else for Mr. Shaw before we release him for the evening?
Thank you, Mr. Cha.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we'll be in touch and we'll have you back for another workshop, that sounds like.
That sounds great.
All right, thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Marie said it was a 30-minute slide.
It's a lot to talk about. It's a lot.
Right to the slides, it would have been.
Next up, we've got Mr. Goddard to discuss storage facilities.
Exciting.
Wait a second, we were done. No, we're not.
How long is this gonna take, Mr. Goddard? Okay, so an hour.
Now, yeah.
Well, trying to keep my recap 2 minutes. Start off with, at the end of last year, you got tired of me doing my monthly report about all these storage facilities that we're looking at locating in Woodland. You asked me to look into it and generate the possibility of opening storage facilities in the city. I did some research and we figured out that the jobs per acre ratio was less than 1 job per acre, whereas our targets are between 4 and 20 in our commercial and industrial districts. Based upon that, I wrote up some ordinance that you asked me to take to the planning commission. The planning commission reviewed it, and they felt that their job was to give you as good of advice as they possibly could. So they asked us to do a little more research and come up with more options than just the prohibition. And so we had a work session and a public hearing, and they came up with some recommendations that is beyond just a prohibition. They felt that if you wanted to leave the opportunity for future storage units, storage facilities in the city, they made several recommendations. One is that they have minimum design standards so that they are attractive and meet our commercial design standards, even in the industrial district. They also recommended that they be allowed as a conditional use rather than just straight up or administrative conditional use. So that way there would be some review as to whether or not they should be fitting in their site. And they also recommended that we follow the city of Ridgefield and institute a limit on square footage per capita or per person within the city of Woodland. If you remember from our December discussion, the industry estimates that there should be a ratio of about 8 to 10 square foot per person in the community. And the city of Woodland, based upon our rough calculations, and then what you use, meaning just within the city or within the city and the area around Woodland where there seems to be a cluster of storage units, our current ratio is between 27 and 78 square feet per person. So we could be anywhere from 3 to 10 times the national saturation level. And so they felt that a 25 square foot per capita basis would allow for maybe 5, 10 years from now, if the city continues to grow, we might have the need for one within the city. But that again excludes and ignores all of the Cowlitz County storage facilities that are around us. So what it basically says is, if we are looking after our own citizens, it is conceivable within 10, 15 years that we might need another storage facility. So they have some recommendations. What you have before you tonight is the prohibition language that you had originally asked me for. And if you want a prohibition, because you do not believe that we need any more in town, and you want to change the zoning code, what you have before you, you could theoretically do your first reading tonight. I would do the environmental review, send it to the state for review, and I would bring it back to you maybe in 60 days for the second reading. If you want to incorporate some of these changes and leave that safety valve 10, 15 years from now, I can rewrite the ordinance and bring it back to you next month or next meeting.
Well,
Mrs. Rounds.
my feeling is that a storage unit doesn't bring very many jobs at all to Woodland, and it's a waste of our commercial property. So as far as I'm concerned, I just seem to have the prohibition because we've got some in town that's increasing already. And there's lots in the county, so I'm against any more in the city limits myself.
Mr. Fredericks?
Can I just clarify just a point that she made? So if I understand the planning commission's recommendation, if you could scroll down a little bit on that. Allowing storage facilities at a ratio of up to 25 square feet per capita. In essence, what we're doing by, if we adopt that language, we're basically saying you can't build one here because we're already within that. And when would we be able to add another storage facility?
So theoretically, if our population doubles, we could add a large one, or we could add, in 10 years, if we grow by 30%, we might add a smaller one.
So really then our choice is if we can do what Ms. Round said, or we can adopt this language, what the planning commission is asking for, which would allow future councils the flexibility to be able to add it versus never having them ever again. Don't you have to allow them in a zone at some point?
You don't have to, it's a police power that you have, you can prohibit them in zoning if you want. But yes, and also bear in mind that you can set that at whatever you want. The industry is between 8 to 10. City of Ridgefield, I think they came down at 15%. We are currently at 27, 28%. So 25 means theoretically if the city grows 10%, then we're starting to get into that rate.
10% is only 600 people.
Yes.
Mrs. Holland?
Okay, so in here I noticed it says they don't bring jobs. How much sales tax revenue do they bring to the city?
So that is a good question. They theoretically have the potential to bring in property tax.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume that they have the opportunity to bring in sales tax, but it is a rental service. Mary might be able to, remember seeing, are those assuming
There's no time.
sales tax on service. So it could add service. One of the issues that was brought up during this discussion, and that is the future of storage seems to be pods and containers, in which case there is actually no structure. So there's no tax revenue because it is an empty field. And so you would never get any property taxes. You would get sales tax for the states that they rent.
And there's currently one of those already on the Clark County side, just past Waltz Meats across from the actual storage facility.
Right.
Oh, that's Cowles County, sorry, Cowles County, yes, sorry.
So that's, I mean, realistically, we don't want you in Woodland, but you can be just outside of city limits and be in every green space. It's pointless. I mean, we don't want you here, but be outside city limits. That's what we're saying.
So that was brought up, and that was actually brought up by a citizen at the planning commission. And I think ultimately what the planning commission opined on that was, it's a really good point, but we would rather use our land and our water and our sewer utilities to get businesses that bring jobs and some and property taxes. So we'd rather have an industry rather than an empty building that brings us sales tax. Let the county waste their property rather than the city waste it.
So it's getting late. And I've been here, what, several hours? So I'm just gonna say it. There's commercial land all over Woodland that has sat vacant for forever. My opinion has always been if somebody wanted to build on it, they would have built on it, right? So we're hoarding up green chunks of land that are zoned commercial or zoned whatever, and they're gonna sit there, and they're gonna continue to sit there. And people are gonna rent or buy existing facilities because it's more cost effective to not build from scratch. And you might have two guys that work at a storage facility and you have all these cameras and stuff, but they're still generating revenue to the city. I mean, if you're gonna keep building houses, approving developments where houses have little tiny wee baby cracker box garages, people are gonna have a place to put their stuff. And that's kind of why we have storage facilities. And I noticed in here that we counted RV places in this storage facility conversation. So people who live in these wee baby cracker box houses with tiny little garages and tiny little driveways don't have a place to put their motorhome. So they're paying somebody else to watch their motorhome. And there's money being generated for that. I mean, we just put in what? The Young RV who sells motorhomes, and now we don't have places for people to buy the motorhomes they bought there. So, I mean, I just think there's a bigger conversation than one we think it's ugly and ghetto and they don't generate jobs, but we have green chunks of property that nobody's ever going to buy and build on. So it's late, and I just wanted to say that because it's like sticks in my craw every time this conversation has come up.
And never say never.
Yeah.
Mr. Plaza?
Okay, so let's say hypothetically, just for argument's sake here, that the prohibition passes. No more storage units. 20 years in the future, oh, we need storage units in Woodland. Would that city council be able to make an amendment or a change to the policy at that point? Okay, so this isn't a, from now until the end of time, no storage units in Woodland. Okay.
Mr. Smith?
Same goes with, if we pass this one, we can also do the prohibition later also. So if it still doesn't look like it's going well, and it looks like more storage units are gonna come in, we're still not okay with it, we can amend and change it at a later date too.
I think we could solve this real simple. We should put these in residential zones. And then
It
people
would
would
make it quicker.
people would have to have less stuff. They didn't want them in.
Right.
You
You
know,
know, or
less
if you live
stuff.
in a teeny tiny home with a teeny tiny driveway, don't have a motorhome.
Right.
Right.
Have less stuff.
Yeah.
You can only put whatever you can fit in your house.
I personally know.
Well, that's social engineering, isn't it?
I
Yes, it
personally
is.
know people who.
Telling people what they can and cannot buy. Sorry, Mr. Smith. Sorry.
I personally know people who bring their motorhomes from Vancouver and store them here. It's kind of like we're their garage at this point because we have so many. Maybe they should be looking at building some more in their towns.
It's not allowed. It's not enough of it. For capital.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I make a motion?
But we're in a workshop right now.
Are we done yet?
Well, no, there was still discussion going, Mr.
Oh.
Fredericks.
I thought we were done, I'm sorry.
No. Is there anything further for the workshop? Any further direction for Mr. Goddard at this point, or any questions for Mr. Goddard? Okay. The time is now 9:47. We're back in regular session. Moving on to action items. Action item I, community development ordinance number 1461, mini storage zoning and moratorium, first reading.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the first reading without any of the recommendations provided by the planning commission. So just an outright ordinance prohibiting the use.
Yowzers. All right, motion on the floor to approve ordinance number 1461, mini storage zoning and moratorium without planning commission recommendations. First reading by Councilmember Fredericks, seconded by Councilmember Plaza. Councilmember Fredericks.
I think Mr. Plaza asked a great question, and that question was, can future councils make a different policy decision than the current council? And that the answer to that question was yes, they can. And so nothing prevents future councils from making a change to this. But I think given the number that we have here, I think it's appropriate to take this action.
Mr. Plaza.
No comment.
Further discussion?
I concur with Mr. Frederick.
All right, seeing nothing else, will the clerk please take the vote on ordinance number 1461?
Councilmember Frederick,
Aye.
Councilmember Brown,
Aye.
Councilmember Chapman,
Aye.
Councilmember Holland,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Aye.
Councilmember Plaza,
Aye.
Councilmember Graham,
Aye.
Ordinance number 1461 has passed without planning commission recommendations. Moving on to action item J, clerk treasurer, ordinance number 1462, budget amendments, second quarter 2020, first and final reading.
Move to adopt ordinance number 1462, first and final reading.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Fredericks, second by Councilmember Chapman. Councilmember Fredericks.
These were reviewed at the finance committee tonight. They are in line with future action that the council has taken regarding budget amendments. And I think the council should approve it.
Councilmember Chapman.
I concur.
Further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the vote on ordinance number 1462?
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Plaza,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Holland,
Aye.
Councilmember Chapman,
Aye.
Councilmember Brown,
Aye.
Councilmember Frederick,
Aye.
Mr. Fredericks, before, go ahead.
Just the planning commission, I would like to, that motion kind of came off as, oh, we don't care. I don't want that to be, I think the planning commission did the right thing by having us look at other things that we weren't taking into consideration. So I appreciate the work that they did there, and I would ask that you extend a thank you to that group for looking at something that maybe we didn't look at. So thank you.
Yes, I agree also.
All right, the time is now 9:51. I'm asking that council go into an executive session regarding potential liability facing the city. So what's that? I don't have the RCW in front of me. Potential litigation, sorry. Potential litigation will be an executive session for approximately 9 minutes.
So you're not recording.
We're going to shut it down right now.
Okay.